Good evening. Notice how many voices were each slightly in their own pitch, which is kind of a little bit what I'm going to talk about tonight. I'm going to talk about a koan. It's called 16 Bodhisattvas Enter the Bathhouse. And some of you may be familiar with this koan. And I'll read it a couple of times. In the old days, there were 16 bodhisattvas, and they all got together into the bath together to realize the cause of water. They called out, "This subtle touch reveals the light that is in everything. We have reached the place where the sons and daughters of the Buddha live." All you Zen students, do you understand what they meant when they said, "This subtle touch reveals the light that is in everything"? At once, you must puncture 7 and penetrate 8. Got it? I'll read it again. In the old days, there were 16 bodhisattvas, and they all got together in the bath and realized the cause of water. They called out, "This subtle touch reveals the light that is in everything. We have reached the place where the sons and daughters of the Buddha live." All you Zen students, do you understand what they meant when they said, "This subtle touch reveals the light that is in everything"? At once, you must puncture 7 and penetrate 8. So, part of this may be clear, none of it may be clear, all of it may be clear. But it also can look quite obscure, which is often the feeling that I have when I look at a koan for the first time. But koans function right here. And they function to wake us up to the Dharma in our own lives. Even though they may come to us from 800, 1200, 1500 years ago. But they are very direct in that every detail in a koan points to something very specific and very real in our own life. Usually when we first encounter a koan, what we're doing is bringing our ordinary mind to it, the way we listen usually, to words that we've heard 100 times and meanings we've had and thought 1,000,000 times, right? So the mind has already decided on things, has already decided what's meant by words, what they are, how they are, what they're pointing at. And knowing in this way is one way. It's one way that we do. We know this way. And this is our ordinary way of knowing. And it serves us. It's pretty efficient in certain ways. But also, it's only knowing in this way. If we are only knowing in this way, our Dharma I, the deeper truth of life is obscured. And it's laid over with a thick overlay of past experience and concepts, which limit our life, limit our mind. Language really is a collection of everything we've known before, and everything we've been taught and heard. And it is not life itself, it's an aspect of life. The mind that knows. So in this koan, what are the characteristics of water? It says, they all got together in the bath together and realized the cause of water. It's an odd phrase, isn't it? The cause of water. So what are the characteristics of water? Well, water cleanses. It's what makes up our oceans and the cells of our body, and the cells of a leaf, and our tears. Water is the current of streams and rivers, and the body of the seven seas. In other words, it's infinite in variety. Genjo Koan says, "Know then that water is life," and it is. It's everywhere. It's part of everything, and especially lately, we're very aware of water. When we hear the phrase "the cause of water," we assume that the dharma of water is something exotic. So, the cause of water. It's really an odd phrase, the cause of water. It's the thing that stopped me. And it's the thing that really lets you know, okay, now you're in the turf, the Koan turf. Stop, pay attention. And notice how the mind tries to figure it out, right? What does this mean? It's mysterious, it's far away, it's out of our reach. The cause of water, what does that mean? What is a cause? What causes water? The cause is something that produces an effect. Cause and effect, actually, is the mechanism of everything, of all activity, cause and effect. Now, these are concepts. But koans really are not about concepts. They are attempting to give us enough of a jolt to remember that life goes beyond conceptual. It's much more than the conceptual. Another phrase, another translation of this phrase is, they suddenly realized realization through the touch of water. Realized realization. That's also a trap. Realization, that word realization can be a trap. So, but what did they realize? I always, when you read koans, or a lot of the stories in Zen, they say such and such happened, and then some monk or nun realized, had realization. And for so long I thought, well, what did they realize? I wanted a sentence to come after that and tell me what it was they realized. What do you think they realized? Did they all realize the same thing? At the touch of water, what do you realize? When you touch water, what do you realize? The mind gets very busy trying to come up with an answer for this question, an answer that will be right, and all the other answers will be wrong. And when that's the case, we know this is exactly the how koans work. It's outside of the realm of right and wrong. But that's a framework that we spend a lot of time living in. And it's the source of a lot of our suffering, right and wrong. But the koan's not actually pointing to a right or wrong answer. It's not even pointing to an answer. Something like water is way beyond an answer. So again, one of the things that becomes more and more terrific as we really absorb this way of approaching life, the Zen way, is the questions get really interesting, much more interesting than the answers we might have for them. Oh, I never thought to wonder about that before. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder what's in that, right? So what's in water? What's this about? And to look into this, we turn to our own experience. This koan emanates from a passage in the Dhamma Sutra involving Ananda. And you may remember Ananda was the Buddha's cousin, and he was at the Buddha's right hand for many years of his life. And poor Ananda, you know, he was there for all of the teachings for years and years, and still he didn't really understand what was meant by realizing Buddha nature. And I think that that's such a terrific part of our war, is to have somebody who, Ananda's the one who remembered every teaching and got it written down. I mean, he was helpful in getting it all written down. And yet he didn't understand it. It was very reassuring to me when I first realized what that meant. It's like, even Ananda didn't get it. Okay, well, I'm not that much of a dunce. So the Buddha brought together a bunch of Bodhisattvas, and because he wanted to explore the quandary that he saw that Ananda was in. And these Bodhisattvas have their Dharma eye open. They have a certain level of realization. And he invites them to describe for Ananda what they experienced. What was the experience that helped them to realize their life? And each of them relates a different experience, mentioning sense experiences. So the first Bodhisattva says, as for my realization, seeing a sight was the primary cause of it. And the second one says, smelling a fragrance was the cause of my realizing. And the third one says, cites the taste as the cause of his realization. For Patachara, water pouring over her feet was the cause of her realization. For Huineng, the sixth Zen ancestor, hearing a line from the Lotus Sutra was the cause of his first awakening. So that's useful. It's useful to, and reassuring to know that any of us, some of us, we now know about cognitive styles, and some of us process auditorially, some of us process visually, some of us process through body motion and movement. We each have our own ways of waking up and of living our life and of experiencing our life through various portals. And we each have our own moments and circumstances that shifts and clarifies our view. Oh, I see. Have you had an experience like that? Oh, I get it. You know, it's in a mild way, it's the feeling of learning something. Oh, it gets clear. Oh, I get it. And it's no longer something outside, it's something that is fully congruent with your own experience. So this realization opens the eye of the heart. And something that seemed outside is no longer outside. It's everywhere. It's obvious. So this is what the Buddha is always talking about. The ideas we have in our thoughts about what Dharma realization is are genuinely and generally vague. We base our understanding on stories we've heard that make a picture in our minds that's kind of exotic, and certainly not in the world that we know. Is that true? Does that sound like a good description of what it is? Like you hear about enlightenment, it's like, oh, well, what is that? And we don't tend to use the word enlightenment because it is so not helpful. Realizing is something that we do. I once asked Hogan, have you ever had Kensho? And Kensho is one of those big moments where everything just opens up. He says, oh, sure, I've had hundreds of them. And I thought, what are you talking about? Because it's always, in the literature, it's always like this one big thing that happens. Not necessarily. We all have our own way of experiencing. So water. What do we know about water? It's everywhere in our lives. Yeah, it is our life. Our cells are composed of it. We experience it in all kinds of ways, but we may not be realizing it, except occasionally, we'll be quiet and hear the rain on the roof. Really hear. And it's not separate, it's just, it fills us up, that sound. I think about the moment when my daughter dipped her new baby, her daughter, into the bath for the first time. It's the first time the baby had a bath. It was in a tub with water. And the look on the baby's face was complete. She was just like, no words were necessary. It was just a moment of really realizing, she still doesn't have a word for it, but that's okay. She doesn't need a word for it. Every cell was responding to the sensations. Anytime we approach a koan, the point is to be dipped in the bath of the koan and to be intimately stirred by it in the fibers of our body. That's the feeling of realization. These images, what do we know of them for ourselves? The koan images propel us, all of the koans, and you may be familiar, you may not be familiar with many koans, but you may be. But they all propel us to cut through the layers of habitual mind pictures, to notice our assumptions, and then look to our own direct experience at where we're pointing. So think about stepping into the bath. We've been working hard, or we've been playing hard outside. It's January. It's cold. It's damp cold. We step into a warm bath. What is that direct experience? The intimate first moment and everything that follows. First the one foot, then the next foot, and then just sinking down into the bath. How does it feel? You don't say hot, you don't say cold, you don't say warm, you just feel it. Whatever the temperature, the experience, just as it is, and nothing else. Water is soft. Is it pleasant? Is it unpleasant? Too hot? Is it dense? When you get into a body of water and swim, you may notice it's buoyant. If you're in the ocean, it's really buoyant. So we're always having this experience of this moment and then going beyond. You may initially get into a bath and just be completely without thought and pure sensation. And then after a while, you remember something you have to do tomorrow, and the mind starts to wander away. And suddenly the body's in the bath and the mind is at the office. This is the separation that we're all talking about. Do not separate from the skin bag here and now. That's a line from one of the chains. What we do, we separate all the time. The mind goes one way and the body stays right here. So here we have a koan that involves 16 characters, 16 bodhisattvas. A bodhisattva chooses to remain in the world of imperfection in the hopes of helping others. And how many people come to this practice thinking, I'm just going to, it's a self-improvement project. When I get to be a bodhisattva, I'm going to just be goodness itself. I'm never going to have a bad thought. I'm never going to get depressed. I'm never going to get anxious, right? That's an idea. There's a bunch of concepts. But bodhisattvas, the thing about it is to be willing to be in the world as it is, in all of it, in everything, every part of the world as it is. So 16 bodhisattvas are the actors in this koan, and we are pointed to all the many ways that they have realization in their own particular styles. And that's true for you, and that's true for me. This is an ongoing process and is continuous in life. At the dedication ceremony, we gave out bells. And there's a tag on each of the bells that says continuous practice. Well, we could just as easily say continuous realization, continuous breathing, continuous being. Not just one, we don't have just one aha, but the ahas of every moment of our life. And when we approach practice as a way of life, this tends to increase. We tend to really appreciate our life. So my Zuni Roshi, my Dharma grandfather, his collected talks were called Appreciate Your Life. We do, we appreciate our life when we're really present in it. It's remarkable. It's vast. There's so much to behold. I once thought we should call Buddhism beholdism, because the feeling of appreciation is really a beholding, holding closely. So there's Ananda, and he's still resting on the words of the Buddha for guidance. Ekam Roshi always used to say, when our Dharma eye opens, we are eyebrow to eyebrow with the ancestors. It's a very intimate image, eyebrow to eyebrow with the ancestors, face to face, which is intimate. We can be intimate with our life, be up close, not separated from our experience by all of the concepts we carry around about it. So this is the way koans work. And when we work with a koan, we're in the bath with all other bodhisattvas. As soon as you stop trying to stop suffering, you're on the path of the bodhisattva. When you realize what suffering is pointing at, which has to do with separating from experience, with really identifying with our aversions, with our restlessness, with our fears, but rather seeing what they are, seeing their nature. Talk about waking up to Buddha nature. That's what we're doing with this practice. If we really pay attention, everything that goes into it, how we're experiencing. A bodhisattva sees through picking and choosing as the basis for action, and takes whatever water is in the tub as the bath. A warm bath is not always as we would have it, beautiful with floating blossoms and sweet perfume. As one of my fellow teachers has put it, at times the water has bullets, blood, and broken bodies floating in it. But those things, those painful things, neither dim the brightness of the water nor negate our true nature as the sons and daughters of Buddha nature. We are beyond picking and choosing. We who are made of water, we are beyond any one sensation. We include all sensation. So what's the meaning of water? What's the meaning of a human life? What will we make of our temporary circumstances and conditions? How do we behave? These are the concerns of the Buddha way. The Bodhisattvas in the bath of this koan called out, "This subtle touch reveals the light that is in everything." We have reached the place where the sons and daughters of the Buddha live. We're always turning towards immersion in the bath of the moment and dissolving our ideas about things. Whatever is wrong, whatever we're suffering about, we can use our open Dharma eye. We can appreciate with the openness that we learn how to abide in Zazen, to stay with whatever the suffering is and trace it back to a mind-held belief. Trace it back to insisting on separating from whatever the experience is. Immersed in the moment, we're always part of the world in deep play, with not one thing that's out of place. Everything's in motion. Our bodies, our minds, our sensations. As a bodhisattva feels the pain of the world, and Avalokiteshvara feels the pain of the world, Kuan Yin feels the pain of the world. And the vase catches the tears in the vase that she holds. Just as a bodhisattva feels the pain of the world, so the way we suffer when we are bound up in our own personal world and identifying with a separate self, with our judgments and aversions. We should remember that when we open our eye to include the entire world in all of its mess and stupidity and greed, it brings with it a certain cost. In the face of wrongdoing and hatred and violence, we discover that we cannot wash off the dirt. The subtle truth reveals the light that is in everything. So this isn't some dream of transforming samsara. Samsara, the world of greed and delusion and clinging. And it also doesn't mean that we don't do our very best to help in whatever ways we are best suited to help. So now, do you remember the last line of the koan? The line, at once you must puncture 7 and penetrate 8. That's such a koanish term, that way of saying things. Awakening, puncturing, penetrating, being punctured, being penetrated by, happens all the time in this moment, in our experience. No matter how many times that you experience realization, that you have a time of saying, oh, and maybe even during this talk, you've had a moment of like, oh, I see. So how many times? You can count them. You experience realization. And whether it's 7 or 8 or 100 or 1 or once or never, the bath is always the nature of water, and water is always the nature of this life. So this koan is a fantastic spur to get into the bath tonight when you get home. Forget all the words. Sometimes we're urged after a koan to just wash out your ears, just forget the words, and go about your life wholly and completely. Open your heart and dive in.